Well, hi, folks. Good morning from California. Good afternoon to the rest of the states. And, what's the deal? There we go. Nice to be with you for the Wisdom of the Soul. I think this is number 21. And onward and upward. On the newsletter this week, I said I wanted to talk about thinking, a little more about logic. So we're going to be logical today. We'll do a opening meditation, of course, in just a moment, and then a bit of instruction and some Q&A at the top of the next hour, about 55 minutes from now. I was thinking also, we call it question and answer. I've usually said that I enjoy and appreciate comments as well as questions. I was thinking this week that one way of encouraging some engagement is maybe to have included in that a suggestion that you just talk about, maybe share with me, and I'll mention this again an hour from now, what one point leaps out at you from whatever number of classes you've been to. So if we've done 20 classes, maybe you've been here for 5 of them. Maybe you've been here for all of them. Some of you have. But however many, what's jumped out at you? I think we're at a point where we could begin to assemble this into one whole thing. And I'd love to hear some feedback about what you're finding most intriguing, most interesting. So we'll get to that at the Q&A again. I do want to talk about various forms of logic and just tell you up front here how important logic is, reasoning and analysis in philosophy. It's one way philosophy is very different from organized religion, in that there's not a whole lot of critical thinking in most cases. I think that's one of the attractions of people to religion, and by that I mean organized religion, is that you don't have to think. Religion is generally speaking a matter of faith, and you don't even have to read the books. That's pretty much done for you, and the interpretation of the book is provided for you, but not with philosophy, especially when we're casting about in this larger field of esoteric philosophy, or a term I've yet to use, which I really like, is the perennial philosophy. That's a term that merits Googling. Actually, perennial, like a flower. We think of a flower as an annual or a perennial. Do you have to plant it every year? Or once planted, does it just manage itself through the winter and come back in the spring? Well, a perennial philosophy is sort of a permanent philosophy traceable to the very roots of human existence. The oldest precepts or concepts of spirituality predating organized religion. Before Moses, before Jesus, before Muhammad, in our monotheism of the Judeo-Christian and Islamic religions. And in the East, there are the Vedas, the Vedic philosophies that include yoga, but really predate so-called Hinduism. Brahmanism became sort of this polyglot of religions called Hinduism. Buddhism came along 2,500 years ago. Taoism is about that same age. And yet there is this perennial philosophy. Some might even call it paganism or pantheism, that goes back to the very beginnings. And we'll touch on that. But my point is simply, you have to learn to be logical and reasonable. And so I thought today we'd play around with different kinds of logic and then other ways of thinking beyond logic, beyond reasoning and analysis. So we'll talk about inductive and deductive. And I'll do my best to avoid this being some dry college-level lecture here. It is a fascinating topic. And if you bear with me a little bit, I think you're going to really dig it. And we'll sharpen the edge on our thinking skills, learn to be more reasonable and more logical, and find out, another way of saying this is just find out the benefits of logic in a world that appears to be less and less logical all the time. And we'll talk about people who conflate thinking with feeling. We have touched on that in the past, the differences between thoughts and feelings. But the number of people who believe they're thinking while being motivated purely by feeling, and the feeling, the emotion, that it must be right because it feels like it ought to be. That phrase gives us, I think, offers us really great insight into where so many people are with their 10-second attention span, getting news from their cell phone, from social media, and the way the algorithms of social media drive people toward what they've already expressed an interest in, creating these loops of ignorance. Talk about that today too, time permitting. And that's all by way of setting up our meditation, which is going to focus on thinking as well. So let's get started. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I love this class. And so get comfortable in your chairs. Sit up straight. Balance yourself. Close your eyes and feel yourself in your body. And just let things begin to settle. Maybe you've had a busy morning. Maybe it's been a very leisurely Sunday. In any event, welcome in all feelings. Think about that bowl of muddy water that you just let sit on the counter for a little bit. And notice that the mud in the water is beginning to settle. And feel that settling. Feel the chair is supporting you. The floor beneath your feet. Let go of a subtle sense that you have to hold yourself together. Sounds strange to say out loud, but there's so much unnecessary tightness and holding on in the body. And combine this with a couple of slow, deep breaths, pulling in strength and power as you inhale. And you feel a letting go feeling as you exhale. Relaxing, feeling safe. And again, allowing the chair on the floor to support you. You know the chair is not going to drop you. The floor is not going to open up and swallow you. Since your eyes are closed, You can easily imagine floating on your back in warm water. Feel supported by the water. And remind yourself from times you've been swimming how important it is, if you expect the water to support you, to relax, to allow the water to support you, to allow yourself to feel supported by the water. And by now you've returned to normal breathing after a few slow, deep breaths. So just put your attention on the bottom of your nose. Imagine being just inside the nostril, at the point where breath enters and leaves the body. And as if that's the most important thing in the world, just watch your body breathe itself. The thing about watching your breath and identifying as the watcher rather than the breather is that it always brings you into the present moment. And while many meditations are about concentration, and you may feel that you have failed to meditate properly if and when you find your mind has carried you off in another direction, perhaps you admonish yourself or use it as evidence you'll never be able to meditate. And what's this all about? Consider that instead the goal is to be aware of the inevitable distraction. How quickly can we recover and find ourselves having been distracted? And what I want you to do, instead of admonish yourself, is put a little smile, the most gentle smile on your face, and say to yourself, of course. As if this is what the mind does. It thinks. It reasons. Often for no reason. Truly, reasoning for no reason. Physiologically, this fight or flight center in the brain is looking for danger, always, perpetually, in every level of mind, trying to keep you safe from danger. So remind yourself that you're safe, that this is a great time to do what you're doing. Sit in this class, meditate with this group. So just acknowledge that your mind has drifted. And then gently bring your awareness back to watching your body breathe itself as the observer or the witness rather than the breather. You could assert yourself and, as we did a moment ago, take a few slow, deep breaths. You could hold your breath, at least for a period of time. But that would make you the breather. Instead, you want to just watch, as if fascinated by the fact that the body is breathing itself right here, right now. Feel the air in your nostrils. Feel the coming and going of the breath. And you will, in time, with practice, experience the slowing down of the thinking. Fewer distractions, less often. Fewer ideas petitioning you for their attention, for your attention. In other words, just as we learn in this way to identify as the awareness of our breathing rather than the breather, we could turn our attention to thinking. Especially since I'm talking to you and providing a narrative. And in the same way, we watch our breathing as the witness rather than the breather. We could watch the mind babble on, ramble on, as the watcher rather than the thinker. So stand back. Just let go and take a step back to see the bigger picture. And one of the secrets to watching your thoughts, and for that matter, just watching your breath, is to suspend judgment. So if a thought occurs to you as either good or bad, right or wrong, productive or destructive, just let go of the judgment and see where the mind goes next. It's like taking the dog for a walk, and you come to a certain point where you can let the dog off the leash and it runs. And it loves the freedom of running. But you don't run trying to keep up with the dog. You let it go. It's a good dog. It'll come when you call it. Take your mind off its leash. Let it go. And be the one that watches your mind run around. Without judging. Judging would be like chasing it, going after it. Instead, just sit still, not attached, allowing your mind to go where it will. Whatever it thinks. When's this meditation going to end? When are we going to get to the main topic? Oh, this ache in my body is bothering me. Gee, I wonder what I'm going to do later today. Oh yeah, I've got these things to do. It'll run all over the place. Don't chase it. Don't go after it. Be the awareness. Just watch it without judging. Without judging the thoughts. Without judging yourself. If you intend to go outside on a beautiful day and go for a bike ride or throw the frisbee in the park or take the dog for a walk or whatever, and you thought it was going to be a nice sunny summer day, but it begins to rain, you might be disappointed by the rain. On the other hand, you might say, oh, far out. I love the rain. You see, there is no good rain or bad rain. The rain is not right or wrong, though it'll please some and disappoint others. The rain is just the rain. It has to happen. Don't judge it. So when a problem comes up in your life, and you begin to worry and fret, as if without really thinking about it much, reflexively, you feel as if this is a matter you have to deal with. This is a problem that you have to solve and that only you can solve, and it torments you and you worry about it. And you extend your logic out 3 or 4 jumps. Well, in order to do this, I'm going to have to do this. And if that's going to happen, then this has to happen, then that means I have to do that. What if you didn't do any of that? You simply acknowledge that this is a problem that in the vast majority of cases is going to resolve itself. They always do, with few exceptions. I mean, let's allow for a few problems never resolving themselves. They do change, though, don't they? They morph. But the vast majority of what we struggle against, I mean the vast bulk of what we worry about, will in time resolve itself. There most likely will have to be some effort on your part, some participation. But does it have to be such a struggle? Need it be so worrisome? What if you just let go and watch it? Remind yourself of times in the past that you were so worried about this or that, and it fixed itself. Trust life. This is not to overstate the value of being the watcher. This is not to say you can just sit and never do anything. But there's a balance where the bulk of our efforts can be released. Trust life. See how that sits when you say to yourself, I trust life. Life supports me. life conspires to support me. I'm not alone. I could not possibly be alone. I had nothing to do with bringing myself here. My very being is a grand mystery. I need not micromanage my life. Let go and trust it. A surfer, a snow skier, a skateboarder has to maintain their balance and determine their direction. But they're supported by the earth, and in the case of the surfer, it's the wave that supports you and carries you forward. There's no effort. All you have to do is bend a little in the knee and sit back and keep your balance, find your balance, remain centered. And the wave will carry you forward and support you. And so it is with life. Surf it, allow it to lift you and support you and carry you. Trust it. Let go of your grip on the reins a little bit. Let the dog off the leash, let him run. Feel the freedom. Meditation becomes joyous when you begin to recognize it as the freedom to let your mind run without having to chase it, keep up with it, manage it, let it go. And practice just watching. It's so liberating. It's so freeing. And our central purpose is to understand what it does, what the mind does on its own. The patterns, the spirals, the loops, the habits. Bring this feeling of being safe and relaxed, of watching without judging, of just being right here, right now, in the present moment, and observing the world around you passively. To identify as a human being rather than a human doing. Bring this orientation and these feelings and this awareness with you as we come back toward the waking state with a simple 3-step self-count when you do this on your own. 1 is forming the intention to return to the waking state. 2, you feel a gentle drifting upward as if floating up toward wide awake. And 3, open your eyes, be wide awake and alert, rested and refreshed back in the room. Nice slow deep breath, inhale. And maybe a stretch, like you're waking up in the morning. Maybe you shake it off a little bit, come back to wide awake, alert, scattered. Here we go. Wide awake, feeling better than before. I like the imagery. I don't know how well it may work for you, of letting the dog run, letting the dog up. Maybe you've never owned a dog. Maybe you have maybe you don't even like dogs. Just letting it run, not working so damn hard. You know, I read once years and years ago, and I've always loved the allegory that worry is like a rocking chair. You sit in the chair and you rock back and forth, and it feels like you're getting a lot done. Maybe you're burning a lot of calories. I guess this works for a treadmill too. You can jump on the treadmill and walk 4 or 5 miles. Yeah, I walked a mile on my treadmill this morning. But when you get off, you're right where you were. You didn't really do much. So worry is like you fret, you wring your hands, your mind races, you lay awake at night. What'll I do? What'll I do? Or often it's a concern about others. What do they think about me? It's impossible, of course, to know. Even if they tell you. Even if they tell you what they think, you don't know what they really think. Hell, they don't know what they really think. Because they think they're the thinker. And it gets all convoluted and crazy. And so then the problem resolves itself, because it would have anyway, and they always do. Nothing is permanent. Everything has its coming and going. And so in time, the problem passes, and you take credit for it. I know this only because I've been here a million times. Oh, thank God we solved the problem. What'd you do about it, Michael? Oh, I worried a lot. I rocked and rocked and rocked and rocked and rocked in that chair. Then the problem resolves itself, and I take credit as if all that worrying had some benefit. And it doesn't, because what are you putting your attention on? All the things that could go wrong. How's the mind work? Well, the mind works according to the law of attraction, that you reap what you sow, karma. So worry is putting your attention on what you're trying to avoid and making up undesirable outcomes that you wish to avoid. All you're doing is feeding the problem. If you wanted to worry elegantly, you'd put your attention on all the different ways it can be solved. Maybe we think that's what we're doing, but often it's not. So we need to look at the difference between deductive and inductive logic. And this can be dry, but it also can be absolutely fascinating. So put your thinking caps on here. And let's do our best to make this interesting, because it really is fascinating to understand the two basic types of reasoning. It's not like there's 15 different ways that we reason and we're going to go over them all. There's only 2 ways to be logical. 2 ways to reason: deductive and inductive. Deductive, you're much more familiar with, so let's start with that. Deductive logic goes back to our buddy Aristotle. It is general to specific. That's all you need to know at the beginning. Deductive logic, and deduce means to subtract, right? To deduct. Deductive logic goes from a general concept, a large set of knowledge, and you break it down, you take it apart. This is how algebra works. You've got this big formula, these constants and these variables, and addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, exponents, equal to another set of constants and variables and operations. And the way to solve the problem, let's say it's just there's an unknown in there, there's an X in there someplace. You start pulling out information. You say, well, I've got a plus 2 on this side, so what if I subtract 2 from that and 2 from the other side? Then I can get rid of this plus 2. And you deduce it. You whinny out the variables. You pull them out until there's nothing left except X equals whatever, 17.4. If you want to write a check, you want to pay for something. I guess most people don't write checks anymore. You want to use your bank card, your Venmo, your Zelle, your Apple Pay or whatever. You have to have a sense of how much is in that account. So you open up your Venmo app and the first thing it tells you how much is in your account. And you subtract in your mind how much you're going to pay to make sure there's enough money in there. There's still going to be some money left. To do that without thinking, gosh, it feels like there's enough money in here to write this check. It feels like there ought to be, there should be. Of course, Venmo wouldn't let you do that. Google Pay or Apple Pay, the way we pay for things now, would just reject it. You don't have the money. You can't do that. It'll stop you. But that's why I use the example of writing a check. Feeling like there ought to be enough money in there is not very smart. You can't just feel, as so many people do in so many areas of their life. Well, how do you know that this is bad or wrong or dangerous? Well, it feels like it ought to be. Well, how do you know this is good or wonderful or will provide a benefit? Well, because it feels like it should. That is not thinking. That's not thinking. That's arriving at a decision based on how you feel. So the most popular form of logic, of reasoning, of analysis is deductive. Take apart thinking, general to specific. Another example, how do you order food from a menu? You go to a restaurant. You're given a menu. That's a limited set of possibilities. You have to choose, unless maybe it's an exceptional restaurant, and you can just order out of your imagination. Could you bring me this and this and this? Most restaurants, no, if it's not on the menu, we can't do it. Or if we could, we wouldn't know what to charge you. You got to work with us. Stay with the menu. Well, you might think that we have a process for deciding what we want by looking over the menu other than deductive thinking, but all we have is deductive thinking in most cases. So while you think you're going through a process of deciding what you want, the first step is to decide what you do not want. You're subtracting. You say, well, this menu is divided into breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then there's some side dishes and some beverages and desserts. And, well, I don't want desserts. I want a meal. Breakfast, it's too late in the day. I don't really feel like breakfast. That's out. Dinner, I think that's too much. I'd rather have more of a lunch, something smaller, lighter, sandwichy like. And don't you see that you're eliminating? Now we're down to the sandwich menu, and we eliminate this and this and this and this. Never did like these things. Don't want that. That doesn't appeal to me. And we get down to 2 or 3 things, and then we choose from what's remaining. That's deductive logic. It's how arithmetic works. It's how we solve all of our problems. We take them apart. Oh, this watch doesn't work. I guess I'll take it apart and break it down into little pieces. What's going on with the car? I don't know. Let's look under the hood. Well, we troubleshoot. Well, does the battery work? Could it be the coil? Are the plugs getting are the plugs sparking? And you break it down. That's pretty much all we've got. However, there is a form of logic that is the complementary way of thinking that we need to know about and understand if we're going to be good, reasonable philosophers and metaphysicians and spiritually oriented people. And that's inductive logic. Now, inductive logic didn't come around until I think, 17th century, early 1600s. And the father of inductive logic is Sir Francis Bacon. And Bacon was a big fan of the scientific method and repeated experimentation and trying this and trying that and gathering information. And he pondered deductive logic in reasoning. And could there be another way? Can we go from specific to general? And that's what inductive logic is. And he wrote extensively about this. He's credited as being the father of inductive logic. So if deductive logic is general to specific, break it down, take it apart. Inductive logic is specific to general. This is really all you need to remember about logic is, am I deducting, which is the vast majority of cases, am I eliminating to break it down to find the solution? Or do I have many observed details and I want to find the continuity, the common thread, or the link in all these observed specifics? How do you do that? Inductive logic is a conjecture. You see, deductive logic is a certainty. It breaks things down to that which is certain. Let me think, get this straight in my head. If we think all crows are black, and this is a crow, then it must be black. But if we say all blackbirds are crows, or even, no, let's say it this way, if all crows are black and I have a black bird, that doesn't make it a crow. You got to work with this a little. If you know for a fact that all crows are black, and you know you have a crow, you've eliminated, it's not a robin, it's not a bluebird, it's not a hawk. This is definitely a crow, then it must be black. But it doesn't, it doesn't follow. You have to be careful when you go into the inductive. Well, I have a black bird, therefore it must be a crow. There's a difference between all crows are black and all black birds are crows. So the problem with inductive logic, the specific to general, is when you generalize, it's only a conjecture. You can't have the certainty that deductive logic provides. So you can say, well, this is a black bird. I'm going to say it's a crow until I find out otherwise. I'm going to assume. I'm going to project. This creates a lot of prejudice, a lot of stereotypes, a lot of relying on your history. This is why you're taught in school to distinguish between anecdotal evidence and clearly understood, well-demonstrated deduction. My deduction, all crows are black, is good until I find a crow that's not black. Then the whole thing gets thrown into a cocked hat and you gotta start all over again. So in discussing the difference between deductive and inductive logic, it's important to understand that inductive logic is not nearly as reliable as the near certainty of deductive logic, because it starts with all things known and you break it down. So whatever you break it down to is known because it's part of the set of all known things, general to specific. Therefore, this crow must be black. The problem with inductive logic, the generalization, is that it's uncertain. You may have just a handful of crows. You've only seen 6 crows in your life. And you're assuming that therefore all crows are black. But you don't really know. If, however, you dedicate your life to studying crows and you read the literature on other people who've studied crows, and you're creating this big set of every crow that's ever been seen is black, well, then you can deduce that, therefore, any crow that you'll ever discover is black. But if you've only seen a half a dozen crows in your whole life and you've never read of any study, and based on this anecdotal evidence, well, I've seen 6 crows, therefore all crows must be black until I find one that's not. And then, of course, you find the aberration or the exception, and your generalization, your conjecture is thrown into a cocked hat. So only 2 forms of logic, deductive and inductive. Deductive logic is certain because you're beginning with what you already know and breaking it down. Inductive is always uncertain because you're trying to generalize about a set of specifics and maybe a very small set. But that's not all the mind does. When we talk about logic and reasoning, there's an assumption of intentionality behind it. I'm deliberately and purposefully reasoning. But that's not all that goes on. We just did an exercise of trying to quiet the mind. And when you think about meditation, get it straight. You don't need to quiet or calm the mind in order to meditate. You meditate so as to develop an ability to sit quietly and allow the mind to petition you less. You meditate to quiet the mind, not the other way around. And what are we quieting? If not reasoning, that ought to be easy, to stop reasoning or stop being reasonable. So what else is going on besides logic, inductive or deductive? Intrusive thoughts. Sometimes this is referred to as stream of consciousness. Well, you're always conscious. Even when you're unconscious, you're conscious. It's one of the difficulties of studying consciousness is the word has so many meanings. If you see a person asleep or in a coma, you might say, well, they're unconscious. But if they're sleeping and the alarm goes off, they wake up. So some part of them, though they were unconscious, some part remains conscious enough to hear the alarm clock. So you can't really say they're unconscious, but we do. That's just the beginning of how confused we are about the nature of awareness and consciousness. So what are these intrusive thoughts? It's the agenda of the unconscious mind. And remember, we don't have two minds, conscious and then unconscious. There's just one mind that's mostly unconscious. And like an iceberg, just a little bit of it sticks up above the water. What is it, 7/8 or 9/10 of the iceberg you never see. So it is with the mind, the conscious mind that you've identified by your name and the image you see in the mirror and the people who've known you all your life, your personality, your persona, your ego, the part of you that identifies as a separated being. That conscious self is just the tip of the iceberg. Intrusive thoughts are the workings of the unconscious mind, bubbling up, petitioning you for attention, demanding that you fear this, insisting that you be worried about that, presuming that you and only you can solve all of these problems and heal all of this heartache and upset and frustration. And you must do that consciously and deliberately. Even though the very thoughts that are telling you to do it are not conscious and not deliberate. They bubble up into the consciousness. They bubble up into awareness, but they come from this swamp of largely negative, worrisome, fatalistic, fearful concepts or thoughts. And we sit there entertaining these intrusive thoughts as if it's us thinking. Hey, Joe, what are you doing? Oh, I was just thinking. What were you thinking about? Well, I don't know. I guess I was just sort of trying to figure out what I'm going to do about this or that or something else. Did you do that deliberately and purposefully? No, actually, I pretty much feel like I'm a victim of intrusive thinking. That's why it's called intrusive. It intrudes upon whatever else you're doing, what you'd like to be doing. Being happy and content, kind and loving and generous and prosperous and fun-loving. And then here come these weighty of intrusive thoughts. You can't have that. You can't do that. What about this? What about that? Well, here's 15 different ways this can fall apart. Because you're not really very good. Have you forgotten how many times you've failed? And you can't have this, and you don't deserve that. And if you got it, you'd probably screw it up anyway. Have you forgotten all the other... How am I doing? Is this familiar to you? I've got a voice in my head that says this stuff all the time to me. And people say, Michael, how do I stop that? And I say, friend, you don't stop it. You can relax and it quiets, but you'll never stop it. What you can do is not pick it up. Just leave it there. Don't identify with it. I'm not that worry. You don't have to believe you don't have to believe every thought that passes through your head and lift it up into the logical mind, deductive or inductive, and start to shred it or slice it or dice it, break it into bite-sized pieces. You don't have to do any of that. If you want to affirm a thought that bubbled up out of the unconscious, oh, that's a great idea. Wow, what a wonderful idea. Then embrace that idea, affirm that idea. Yes, yes. What a wonderful insight that was. Yes. But most of the time it's going to be garbage. It's going to be horrible, negative, self-doubting, just destructive as hell. Even though it's really the brain's intention to try to keep you safe. It's a survival impulse that is driving all of this negativity. But if it's nonsense, if it's BS, if given the way the mind works, that you reap what you sow, karma, right? You get what you expect. You go where you look. If you look at what you're trying to avoid, you're going to move toward the very thing you wish to avoid by dwelling upon it. You have to recognize the things you wish to avoid, and then, as quickly as possible, turn your attention to what you wish to avoid. I'm sorry. Turn your attention to that which you wish to create or manifest. So if I'm skiing down a slope and in the middle of this open space, there's one giant tree. If I look at the tree and try to avoid it on my skis, every action that I take will be countermanded by the unconscious. It says, you reap what you sow. This is your karma. You go where you look. You get what you expect. If you look at that tree, no matter how you dig in your poles or shift your body weight, you'll come right back to the tree. And boing. I learned this motorcycling. If there's a rock on the road, you look at the rock and steer around it, you hit the rock. You have to look at the path around the obstacle and then zoom, you go there. So we do have to manage our thoughts. But intrusive thoughts are so much garbage. It's noon, so I'm going to wrap this up and go to your questions and answers here. You may want to compose your question, your comment, or as I said earlier, maybe one big lesson that you've learned in the last few weeks. I'd love to get some feedback on that. So put that in the chat box, and in a minute we'll go to the questions, and Melinda will we'll go to those. So when it comes to these unconscious, intrusive thoughts, you don't have to lift every one of those up into the logical mind. If you want to affirm it, embrace it. But for the vast majority of unconscious, intrusive thinking, just let it go. You may have to do that repeatedly. Let it go, let it go. Look at it long enough to determine its irrelevance, or does it have relevance? Is there some benefit in this negative thought? You get a negative thought driving on the freeway, some negative thought comes up. What if my tire blows out and I swerve into the median and have a horrible accident? Well, you can let go of all of that, but you may want to say, I think I got 30 or 40,000 miles on these tires. Maybe I should check them out. Next time I'm in a service station. What are service stations? Where would you go? You have to go to a tire center now and have them check the tread for you. Might be a good idea. But you don't need to keep driving and freaking out about what if. Just let that go. Put it on in your phone, on your calendar, have tires checked out, put it on your to-do list, and then let it go. The vast majority of this intrusive stuff is not only negative, it's harmful, though usually irrelevant. And then there's intuition. So there's deductive logic, inductive logic, both conscious and purposeful. Intrusive thoughts, which are unconscious and full of negativity, and part of the stress and anxiety of life that ages us and creates disease and frustrates us in relationships. And so many of our problems can be traced to this holding on to this negative noise in your head. And then there's intuition. Intuition is not illogical, but it is non-logical. And it feels very different than this drumbeat of negativity that we've described as intrusive thinking. Intuition is a dawning, and I want to talk more about this next week. It's the coming of light. It may be, as they say, a dawning. It often is a gradual illumination. Sometimes it's the intuition arrives like that archetype of the light bulb popping on when you get a good idea. The aha experience. Eureka illumination. I've got it. That's it. Who was it? Archimedes in the bathtub. Remember that story? Do you know that story? This guy's working for months on how do I discover the volume of an irregularly shaped object. You know, if it was a square, I could figure out the volume. If it was a circle, I'd have a sphere, I'd have no problem. If it was a cone, I know the math. But if it's some crazy shape, way too complicated, how can I figure out the volume? And he's in the bathtub one day, and he thought, well, if I submerge this object, it's going to raise the water level. Oh my God, by determining the change in the volume of the water, I can, the displacement, so-called, I can figure out the volume of an irregularly shaped object. Aha, eureka, he allegedly said. And that's where that whole idea of eureka, I found it. It's the California state motto, eureka. I found it, the land of milk and honey, California. But again, illumination, the coming of the light. Sometimes it's a lid lifting, top of your head blows off, illumination. Oh my Lord, my life has changed forevermore. Whether it's so intuition comes as light, enlightenment. So important in spiritual growth, a realization of thoughts that arrive full blown. Get excited about this. You mean without slicing and dicing and shredding, without deductive logic and inductive logic, and devoid of all these intrusive thoughts, I can suddenly be enlightened, become aware to see what I had never seen before, bursting into my awareness, full blown, as if already thought out some other place and then just laid out in front of me. With a confirmation rush in my body that viscerally I feel that's it. That's obviously it. That's the answer I've been looking for. I now know what to do. Oh, I'm so excited. So maybe it was a lid-lifting realization, thunderstruck. Maybe the light bulb popped on. More likely it was a gradual dawning of awareness, slowly watching the sunrise. But it's always light. I think that's really profound. To wait for the light. To encourage the light. To deliberately and purposefully set logic aside, set intrusive thinking aside by just not holding on to it. remaining in the moment. Because any thought about the past, any thought about the future, takes you away from the reality of the present moment. And that's the only reality there is. Your thoughts of the past, your memories, your recollections, they're just dreams in your head. They're images. Same with the future. You don't know. You're making stuff up. You're just dreaming. It may be a nightmare. It could be a wonderful dream, but it's fanciful in any event. It's just images in your head. Only the present moment is real, and for all those times we spend reviewing the past with regret and resentment, and I wish I could do that over again, and anticipating a future full of fear and danger and worry, and every moment that we spend in the past or the future, we miss the reality of being alive right here, right now. It's the only thing that's real, is this eternal unfolding instant. And it has a rhythm. It's cyclic. There's an in-breath and an out-breath to it. There's a coming and a going. There's fear. There's love. But only in the present moment, be here and now. It's the only thing that's real, is the present moment. So I'm going to next week explore intuition. How do we promote intuition? All right. Now that we've looked at logic and these horrible intrusive thoughts that constantly petition us for attention, how do I promote intuition? And why didn't they teach us this in school? Why were we not taught about awareness? Somebody may have demanded that we concentrate, that we pay attention, but that sounds like an effort. I can't concentrate. Well, you have to try harder to concentrate. Whoever told us concentration is a relaxation skill? This was one of the major breakthroughs 50 years ago in so-called sports psychology, that the more relaxed I am, the better I do. I've got to find that point between not caring at all and trying too hard. If I don't care at all, I'll do badly, but the harder I try, the worse I do. So where do I find the top of that bell curve? How can I turn fear into excitement? They feel the same way in the body. And how do I promote intuition, insight, and understanding that arrives full-blown, already thought out? You know what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's the language of emotions. To understand your emotions, thinking doesn't work. I'm sure you've noticed that. You think and think, it's like the rocking chair again. You think and think and think about your emotions. You're not going anywhere. What else could we do? Stop thinking, identifies the awareness, and as you relax and breathe and let go, that still small voice, that whisper, conscience is part of this, not consciousness. Well, conscience is part of consciousness, but conscience is like that word C-O-N, science, with science. That's your conscience. That's your Jiminy Cricket. That's the part that knows right from wrong, but it knows a lot more than right from wrong. It knows the answers. In fact, the game is rigged. And I'll just say this as a postulate and let you figure it out whether it's true or not. What if every problem you've ever had contains within it the solution? What if it's guaranteed that there is a solution enfolded within every single problem? The game is to realize it. And that's passive. That's a letting go. Standing back, very much like a meditation, but you can do it with your eyes open. It's called mindfulness. And the more you relax, and the less you rely on thinking and worrying, logic introduced by these, interrupted rather by these intrusive thoughts, the more likely you are to realize. Approach your problems with logic. If it's easy to reason your way through it and you know the answer, great. But for all those times you don't, let's learn to promote intuition, that still small voice. We have to quiet the loud voices, the negative, intrusive thoughts, in order to hear it, and let that little whispered voice say, "Psst, you know what to do. This is what to do. This is where you should go." Well, I don't know if I should trust my feelings. We need to know the difference between intuition and instinct. And that's what we'll talk about next week. What is intuition? How do we develop it? How do we use it to know our emotions and the meaning of their emotions, the meaning of our emotions, which is the portal to spiritual growth. There is no spiritual growth until you understand your emotions and how to manage them. Let's go to the questions, Mindy.
Thank you, Michael. We don't have anything up right this second, so go ahead and chat me any thoughts or questions you might have, or just let me know that you want to say something. This may be jumping ahead, but I know from your history that you attended Silva Mind Control, and I wonder about the interface with what you were talking about, solving our problems, and that they're all in there. If there's the problem and the solution go hand in hand. I'm really intrigued by his method. If you had a comment on that or wanted to wait on it.
No, I'm happy to comment on that. Again, I want to implore those of you who are with us live today, if you don't have a comment or a question, maybe just one little, to help me, one idea, one concept that you've learned from the class that intrigued you, that has interested you, that you want to know more about, that was central to the reasons why you keep coming back. I'd love that feedback, just to help me with the curriculum and what intrigues you, what you're learning here. Any of that, just brief feedback I'd love. And you can just type it in chat and Mindy will read it if you don't want to open your mic. Silva I took in the early 70s, Melinda, 1974. I know you remember that time because we were all friends and living together for part of that time. The back room. I had a girlfriend who was not Melinda. I don't want to. Melinda was in medical school and I was working in radio, and my girlfriend Joanne and I at the time rented a room to Melinda. That's how we know each other and have been friends all these years. Silva is a course in, what I liked about it, Mindy, was there was nothing to join. It was not a group. It was not a cult that you joined and became a member of or a follower of any central authority figure, no guru. Most people that took Silva Mind Control knew nothing of Jose Silva, never met him, never saw him, never heard from him. It was basically a class in self-hypnosis more than meditation. But I took it because I wanted to learn meditation, but I didn't want to join an organization. I was pretty burned on religion, and there were all these cults in the 60s and 70s I wanted to avoid. And so that was the appeal of Silva Mind Control. And we learned a number of just basic tools and techniques that that became more accessible as you relax, including pain control and accelerated healing and memory and accelerated understanding and learning. All of this is facilitated, I discovered, through Silva mind control by deep relaxation. And I had a couple of dreams while I was taking that class that really affirmed that this was the way to go. But what it was missing was anything to do with emotions. There was no it was very cerebral. Nothing about emotions at all. And so my interest in emotions came later and has been very central to my life because you just never taught about it. And I was so intrigued by the fact that people are driven by emotions. They're not logic. Humans are not very logical. They're not very reasonable, especially when they get excited and worked up by these emotions that they don't understand. Then we become even less logical and less reasonable. So Silva, for me, was a springboard to the human potential movement. And it wasn't really until 1995, like 20 years later, that Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence was released. And I thought, oh my God, he's done it. This is exactly what I've been looking for. A way of talking about emotional intelligence. Even that phrase, emotional intelligence, was a breakthrough in the mid-90s for so many people. And the research only goes back to the 80s. There's virtually nothing before the mid-1980s of research into the nature of emotions, which, again, motivates people to such a large degree that they find truth not in being reasonable, but in feeling like it ought to be true. That's what Fox News is. They are a multi-billion-dollar company. The hosts, so-called, the pundits, make tens of millions of dollars a year substituting emotional outrage for factual information. And people buy into it and believe it because it feels like it ought to be true. And that's why I used that Thomas Sowell quote in my newsletter about the problem is not that Johnny can't read. The problem is not that Johnny can't think. It's that Johnny doesn't know what thinking is. And Melinda, thanks for reminding me that Thomas Sowell is a right-wing neo-Nazi. I knew that name was familiar when I wrote it last night, but I totally forgot who I was quoting.
I did want to let you know that Bob and Hanif do have some comments before our time gets too short.
Okay, good. I'll go to them in just a sec. And his point is that we don't know the difference between thinking and feeling. And when our feelings do demand our attention, we use thinking, logic, to approach an emotional feeling, as if logic, inductive or deductive, would somehow help us understand our emotions, and it doesn't. But intuition does. Intuition is the language of emotions. And when you look for, why do I feel the way I feel, and what does it mean? What is this feeling telling me? It's the main reason people do what they do and believe what they believe, and yet it will not succumb to logic. No wonder we're in a mess. And schools don't teach awareness. Again, concentration is not an effort, it's a relaxation skill. And I prefer to call it awareness rather than concentration because we're so biased by I can't concentrate, try harder. And what's happened to our attention span? And the number of kids that suffer so-called attention deficit. God, what a name. For not being able to focus, for not being able to maintain, stabilize our awareness without these intrusive thoughts dragging us here and there. So I didn't get any of that from Silva. I just basically learned induction, meditation, and the self-hypnosis part is the suggestion. Meditation is receptive. Self-hypnosis or hypnosis is the complement, using deep relaxation to become more amenable to suggestion, to understand more easily with fewer repetitions. In sets of instructions, commands, suggestions, planting the seed. That's the hypnosis side. Open and receptive to a response or an answer from the higher self. The intuition's really the voice of the soul. That still small voice. When you quiet the ego, the soul comes through and it whispers, and it brings with it a confirmation, a visceral feeling of, oh my God, that's got it. It's always light. It always comes as light. Logic doesn't come as light. It's a very different feeling that goes with it. Okay, Melinda, who do you want to go to first?
Bob was first, and then Hanif had a comment too.
Okay. You want to read Bob's question?
Bob, are you ready?
He's got to unmute. Go ahead. And did you put anything in the chat box?
Gosh. Hanif, if you're ready, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. First of all, Michael, thank you. Actually, earlier you asked, what one big lesson have you got from this 21 sessions? After 21, I think I only missed 2, so I'll pat myself on the back for that one.
Thank you for that.
The one big lesson for me is that what I've learned is that we complicate our own lives by our thoughts and irrational beliefs most of the time, or I should say all the time. That's been the big takeaway for me so far. And the second is, Michael, you maybe, don't necessarily have to answer it today, but maybe over time. And it's really more of a question and a comment. For me, awareness and focus are interchangeable terms somehow. Michael, how do you differentiate between the two?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think there is a lot of differentiation. I think it's very slight. Because awareness, true awareness, expanded awareness, minimizes distraction, that is, promotes focus. So we can be aware, but in how shall I say, a non-expanded awareness, to be barely aware. Yes, I'm aware that the traffic light as I approach it just turned red. And so I'm going to brake. I was aware of that. But at the time, I was probably listening to the radio and singing along, or talking to a friend, or maybe chatting on the cell. But while I'm doing all of that, driving the car, manipulating the pedals, the brake, the accelerator, the steering wheel, talking on the cell phone through the dashboard, of course, hands-free. But part of me noticed that the traffic light turned red, so I brake and slow to a stop. So there's awareness there, but it's not really expanded awareness. And so it's less likely to be focused. As awareness expands, it's easier to focus. Awareness by its very nature has a quality of focusing, we'll say, on the present moment without judgment. That's what mindfulness is. Can we be aware and not mindful? Well, that would be a very limited kind of awareness where my awareness is jumping around. Someone with a 10-second or 20-second attention span, which is pretty much what it's down to now with cell phones and iPads, TV commercials. People talk about attention spans of only 10 minutes. But if you really examine what's going on in the head, 10 seconds is a long time for people to pay attention anymore. And this is new. This is all the result of overstimulus and stress and technology we don't understand. People don't know how a refrigerator works. They don't know how a microwave works, much less a cell phone or a computer. It wasn't that long ago, in my lifetime, actually, as a boy, I pretty much knew after the 8th grade how everything worked. I understood TV, I understood radio, I understood electricity, I understood thermodynamics, I had a pretty good understanding of gravity, chemistry. Chemistry came a little later. But now, it started for me with a handheld calculator. I had no idea how. I paid like $350 for you. Some of you guys are old enough to remember exactly what I'm talking about, those first calculators. Texas Instruments made one. They were just, I couldn't even figure out how the display worked. I read an article on how the display worked. Couldn't even comprehend that. And since then, I've lost it. It's just, I just can't keep track of my ability to understand all this technology. And that contributes to this short attention span, to this lack of focus and lack of awareness. So I think to answer your question, my sense of it, Hanif, is that focus is sort of a quality of awareness. It's a subset. You can be aware and unfocused. You can be aware and have a high degree of focus, but you can't be focused if you're not aware. So first awareness, and then how aware. And the higher your consciousness, the more expanded your awareness, the greater will be the focus, the ability to maintain that without a wavering. And just off the top of my head, that's the best I can do for you. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Michael, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Hanif.
Bob had a quick comment too, if we have time.
We do.
Yeah, I know you're very close to the end, but just real briefly, what stands out for me, since you asked, is the meditations. Been so helpful for me, and I can't thank you enough. I'm doing them every day as we go. Anyway, I've gone back and watched all the videos that I've missed, and I can even, if anybody wants to know, tell you that show number 5 and number 12 and number 15 have the best meditations. And my other brief comment would be about worry. There's a great lyric, and I'm not sure who it is, but it might be Tom Petty, that said, and I even know more than a couple of people, at least a couple of people that have this tattooed somewhere on their body. It's most things I worry about never happen anyway.
I think Mark Twain is often given credit for popularizing that. Mark Twain said, I can only paraphrase, but 98% of the stuff I worry about never happens.
Yeah.
But if we dug deeper, we could probably find ancient ancient philosophers arriving at the same conclusion. Yeah, so the question is, why do we do it? And again, it's because it's intrusive, it's unconscious, it's bubbling up into awareness. We believe that it's thinking, it's not thinking. It's why it contributes to the belief we're victims of everything. We're even victims of our thinking. We're victims of our emotions. People will say, well, I changed my mind or I changed my behavior. Whoever said to you, I changed the way I feel about it. I changed my emotions. It's worthy of reflecting on, but I don't think most people are inclined to talk like that. We're victims of our emotions. If I get angry, there's nothing I can do. I need to vent. No, you don't need to vent. You don't need to yell and scream and throw things and say hurtful things to other people to make them hurt the way you hurt. No, you don't have to do any of that stuff. What we could benefit from is being more aware and more conscious. Understanding is what that's all about. And it's a fascinating field, and I'm glad you share that interest. Thank you. Yeah, that really helps. I'm going to, again, in the future, ask that the Q&A include, what are you learning? What are you getting from this? And so thanks to both of you guys for that. And thanks to each and every one of you for being with me today. And so next week, let's go into intuition. Let's learn to use relaxation and expanded awareness to be more intuitive and to listen to those voices and watch those pictures in our mind and feel the feelings in our body. This was a big breakthrough for me back in the day, to know that I could feel an emotion in my body and not just think it in my head. Nobody ever told me how to do that. So I always assumed, being a relatively intelligent guy, that what else have I got but my thinking to use to understand my emotional feelings? Nobody ever said move down into your body, except that's where feelings live. The interesting thing about the emotion is that it stands between thought and feeling, and therefore is a little of both. There is definitely a mental interface to emotional feelings, but you experience the feeling in the physical body. So the emotion is both mental and physical. See, it's the bridge, the interface, the connection between what you think and what you do. The emotion is why you think it and why you do it. And of the 7 W's, who, what, where, when, why, and how, the W's on the back end and the how, the why is the one we rarely address. In journalism, it's ignored. That's why I got so frustrated with journalism. I knew as a news reporter in LA that every day 3 people were going to be murdered, and I could supply the who, the where, the what, the when, the how. But why? Never talked about why the murder rate was so high. So that's what we'll address as philosophers. That's the great question. Why, for most people? Because I felt like it. And put up your dukes. You want to make something out of it? We immediately get defensive. We're defending our fear. I've got a right to be ignorant and confused and my brain jumping all over the place. I did it because I felt like it. You want to step outside? All right, folks. I love this class so much, it's hard for me to end it. Thank you for being here. You can always email me, by the way. my, I guess the best email address for this class to help me organize is awmysteryschool@gmail.com. AW for Ageless Wisdom, awmysteryschool@gmail.com. Anything, I'm happy to respond to. Not only do I read all my mail, I respond to it. So I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for being here. I want you to unmute and say Salam and farewell to your friends and associates, and I'll see you next week. Namaste, aloha, salam.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. See you next week.
Thanks, guys. Aloha.
Good seeing you again, Michael.
Aloha.